Chapter 13. Veiled in a dust fog, the four riders jogged steadily towards Coyote Springs. "Say!" Bill had sunk deep in thought. With the abrupt exclamation, he spurred up beside the sheriff. "You didn't say how many jaspers was in that bunch that grabbed Miss Ford." "3," replied Pat shortly. He was dust-dry and riled. The kidnapping of Pete's niece at what men would call a gunshot from the courthouse spoke little of the ability of the county sheriff, particularly since it came atop of an old prospector's brutal murder. "You don't say," mused Bill. "I'll lamp the tracks of 2 horses out on Big Oak Flat, where the trail's spongy from seepage. 'Peared like they was dropping down from the W bar. Figured that maybe it was Todd and a partner layin' for me, but I never seed hide nor hair of the jaspers. That adds up to 6 riders doing their damnedest to blast Plumford and me to kingdom come. 5 and the girl. I reckon you hit it, Bill. Todd might have held good cards. You packing any chuck on that crowbait you're tolling?" "I got plenty," grunted the rider. "Plumford figured on a long trip, but we couldn't locate water beyond the wall, so he had to get the hell out before we frazzled. Yes, sirree." "Good," grunted Pat. "We could use that chuck." At Coyote Springs, the sheriff spread his hand. "I figure they're holding the girl at the Mirage Mine," he explained to the 3 attentive riders who were hunking around the fire. "And I'll gamble the W bar is tangled up in the ruckus. It's mighty difficult to follow a trail in that hard rock country, so Sam and I will keep cases on the hole in the wall and snag the first gent who rides out. And maybe we can find means to make 'em talk. You, Ezra, and Bill, mosey around the W bar and see what you can pick up." Sunup saw Pat and his squat partner leading Bill's pack pony far out onto the alkali plain. One-eyed Ezra and Bill were on the back trail. It was noon when the sheriff and Sam reached the long pinnacle protruding from the plain. Pat circled the base and piled out of the leather at the spot where he'd clambered up to the observation post and cut down the lookout. "Hobble the horses," he told his partner. "We're gonna have to pack chuck and water up to the top." "You ain't getting me out on that ledge again," declared Sam. "I swallered my tonsils last time I clung to that doggone cliff. I ain't no craving to do it again." "Suits me," replied Pat indifferently. "You stay here and ride hard on them horses." His lips curved in a cruel, silent smile. He knew Sam of old. His squat partner snorted and flung a canteen over his shoulder. "I ain't no cavalryman." Heavy laden, they began to work up the chimney. Evidence that other visitors had climbed to the peak between the pinnacles met their eyes when they gingerly worked over their way along to the ridge cliff. The body of the lookout had vanished. A pair of gray blankets lay in the cave, and cigarette butts were strewn around. They set the chuck in the water out of the blazing sun. Pat hunkered on the ledge and focused his glasses on the break in the wall. Nothing moved on the arid waste. After a careful survey, he set the glasses down and rolled the smoke. "Me and you'll spell each other watching that hole," he told Sam. "The rats can't get out no other way." When darkness closed in and the vigil ceased for the day, the bleak plain bound by the distant irregular black band that was the wall had remained dead and deserted. At dawn, Pat resumed the lookout, shading the lens of his glasses against the telltale glint of the rising sun. And he was speedily rewarded. A string of burrows slowly spilled out of the gap. Eyes strained, the sheriff counted them. 9, 10, a dozen, all with loads. 4 riders escorted them. The pack train strung out and crawled southward. "I'll stake my saddle that oar's from the Mirage," murmured Pat. "Hey, Sam!" The squat rider emerged from the cave, eyes heavy with sleep. "Take a look-see," invited the sheriff. "Yanks me out to squint through his dang spyglass," grumbled Sam. He took the glasses and swept the plains. "Hey, there's a pack train!" he exclaimed with rising excitement. "And there's only one way they can pack out of the barrens." "You said it. We'll hit their trail when they drift on away." The sheriff watched the plodding burros out of sight. It was not difficult to guess their first stop, Coyote Springs. There was no other water for 20 miles, and after that, there was a poser Pat was determined to answer. If he could locate the Mirage Mine, he had a strong hunch he could solve the mystery of Pete's death and Phyllis Ford's disappearance at the same time. And maybe the gent at the receiving end of the ore shipment could answer some almighty important questions. The burros were out of sight when the pair reloaded the pack pony and forked onto their horses. They hit southward again, across the rocky swales, pressing towards the spring. When they finally pulled up at the rocky basin of still water, their quarry had passed on. But on the trail chopped by Burro's sharp hooves, it was plain. At a jogging trot, they followed it eastward, and then on the telltale water-soaked bottoms of Big Oak Flat, it veered abruptly south and coiled up the benches that rose beyond like a giant stairway toward the ranch that Bill Williams had lost on the turn of a card. "Well, the Bar W or I'm Sawash," barked Sam, as they gave the ponies their head and worked upward. "Reach!" The tense command hit their ears from a tangled clumps of chokeberry around which the trail meandered. As one, the sheriff and Sam flung themselves from their ponies and clawed for iron. Ezra's deep roar of laughter broke out upon the clicking of thumbed hammers. Shoulders shaken, he burst from the bush. "Could have bored the pair of you, and you'd never have known what hit you," he chuckled. Sam picked himself out of the trail dust, features puckering with disgust. "Won't you ever grow up, you big ape? Not that bushwhacking wouldn't be right down your alleyway." "Did you see a string of burros ahead?" inquired Pat, beating the gray dust from his pants. "Reckon they're pulling into W Bar right now," boomed Ezra, still chuckling at Sam's scowling features. "Bill's keeping cases on 'em. Figured I'd beat back and put you Jaspers wise. Bill'll be down at Big Oak come sundown." Although the slanting rays of the setting sun still bathed the benches with mellow light, it was gloomy gray beneath the oaks down in the bottoms when Bill rode in. He peeled out of leather, eyes aglow with excitement. "Them coyotes been dumping ore down the old well back of the house barn. They done turned the burros and saddle stock out in pasture. I reckon they're laying over." "Stout around?" inquired the sheriff. "No, a gunny, 3 greasers, and Mamie. The gunny tied to make Mamie, and she sure cussed the buzzard out." Bill grinned at the recollection. "Told him to spread his blankets in the bunkhouse with the chili eaters. Didn't set well with that short-triggered man, but Mamie was talking from behind a shotgun, and that don't admit to no arguments. Not in Mamie's fist, no sirree." "Reckon they'll pull out for the Mirage Mine at sunup," observed Pat thoughtfully. "This is where we locate that doggone mine." "Trail 'em," suggested Sam, dark eyes snapping. "No," grunted the sheriff. "We'll be them." His lean features crinkled with amusement as he observed the expressions of bewilderment that wreathed the faces of his companions. "Grab 'em," he explained. "One of the greasers leads us back, and 3 of us helps herd the burros." "There's 4 gents present," corrected Bill. "One stays," returned Pat firmly. "Maybe they got a look out at the hole in the wall." The squat rider's smoky eyes signaled his belligerence. "Say, Pat Stevens, you aren't acing me out of this fracas. I got personal reasons for locating Miss Ford." Pat held up his hand. "Pull in your horns. Maybe there won't be 4 of us, and after we get the gents on the W. Barker railed and hogtied, if there's still 4 of us, you gents can cut for it." "Oh, I never had no luck with cards," groaned Bill. A full moon washed the benches with silver when Bill led the posse up the canyon that gashed the earth behind the spread. They tied their ponies to the looping roots of a twisted cedar, unstrapped their spurs, and scrambled up the steep bank and lay flat. The W bar lay silent, unlit, patched with dark shadows. Animals drifted around the barbed wire pasture beyond the buildings. Bullfrogs croaked in chorus. The low bunkhouse lay within a stone's throw. Between it and the ranch house, 50 paces beyond, was a stretch of beaten earth studded with tall pines. The 4 moved forward silently through the shadows. When the entrance to the bunkhouse came into view, Pat saw the door was wide open. His eyes rested on the dark, oblong doorway. A man standing in that doorway would be clearly outlined against the moonlit yard behind him, and the men within, shrouded by darkness, could cut him down with ease. Their quarry must have tolled for the bunkhouse, and that was plain. He swung around towards Bill, crouching beside him in the shadows. "You put in hay before you quit?" "Sure. There's a stack over there in the horse barn." "Engine over and set a pile beside that bunkhouse door, and then take cover." The rider moved soundlessly through the somber pines. Pat watched him out of sight, then gave low-voiced directions to his partner. "Cover that bunkhouse when I set that hay on fire. And remember, we gotta get 1 greaser out alive." Standing straight against a tree trunk, the sheriff watched Bill as he toted a bulging armful of hay across the bare ground between the pines and carefully set it into position. Then he moved stealthily toward the shadow of the tank house nearby and vanished from sight. Down by the corral, a dog began barking furiously. Pat swore softly. A slip-up now would mean trouble. He stepped out into the moonlight, approaching the bunkhouse door, careful to keep out of line of sight of those within. From the corner of his eye, he saw a window of the ranch house leap into light. Pat bent, lit a match and applied it to the dry hay, and it blazed up in a flash. He thrust the pile into the open doorway with his boot and stepped back. The dog still yapped, but the bunkhouse was still as death. The hay crackled and roared into high flame as the draft caught it. "Fire!" yelled the sheriff. A startled shout echoed from the bunkhouse. Hatless, a tousled Mexican plunged frenziedly through the doorway. Another plummeted at his heels, spitting shrill oaths as his bare feet hit the burning hay, now fast dying down. A third shot out, then booted. Twin guns swung low. A wiry rider, alert as a fox, slid through, head swiveling as his eyes searched the trees around. The Mexicans halted, bunched, and stared into the shadowed moonlight with bewildered eyes. The gunman kicked contemptuously at the burning hay and made a quick jump backwards for the cover of doorway. "Hoist him up!" Pat's voice cut in sharply. He stepped out from beneath a pine. The gunman dabbed for his right gun. It arched up, spitting red. Pat's .45 boomed. The gunman spun round and hit the door jamb. His weapon plunked into the smoldering hay. Even as it fell, he recovered balance and his left iron came out, lacing fire at hip-low aim. At the same moment, a Mexican jerked a gun and threw down on the sheriff plain in the moonlight. 3 guns thundered from the shadow. The gunnies in the doorway went down in a heap, and the Mexican folded up like a jackknife crawling in the thick dust. His 2 companions, eyes staring, hastily stretched their arms high. Smoking 6 gun in his fist, the sheriff stepped forward. Quickly, he ran his free hand over the quaking Mexicans, tossing a knife from a neck sheath over his shoulder and motioned them into the bunkhouse. They scrambled ahead of him, stepping gingerly over the sprawled body of the dead gunman. The members of the posse issued from the shadows. Pat lit a match and set it to a stable lamp. He hung the lamp on a peg and surveyed the prisoners. They were typically the border cutthroats, clad in soiled shirts and greasy velvet pants, banded by gaudy sashes. Their shifting eyes, glinting against the swarthy features, darted from the sheriff to his 3 companions who crowded in behind him. Pat addressed the nearest Mexican. "You savvy Yankee?" Eyes surly, the other shook his head. Pat grabbed him by the shoulder and swung him towards Ezra. "String the buzzard up." "Si, senor," gasped the Mexican. "I speak English." "I figured that'd make you talk," said the sheriff curtly. "Where'd you get that load of ore?" "The mine." "What mine?" The Mexican shrugged his shoulders and stared blankly. Pat glanced at Ezra. "Reckon we gotta choke it out of the coyote." The one-eyed big man's fist fastened upon the stubby Mexican. Without apparent effort, he lifted him and threw him towards the doorway. "Go get me a rope, Bill," he rumbled. "We can string him up outside." Lips slack and eyes distorted with terror, the Mexican sank to his knees. "Senor, I do not know. It's beyond." He pointed westward. "Where's it located?" Pat demanded. The Mexican gestured again. "Beyond big mountain, senor." Bill stood in the doorway. "Well," he demanded, "do I go get the rope?" "Sure," said Pat. He held up his hand abruptly. "Listen." They stood silent. Through the night came the sound of racing pony hooves, circling southwest, then gradually dying in the distance. "Well, it sure sounds like Mummy is sure punching the breeze," said Bill. "Heading for Dansville, I'd say." End of chapter 13.